This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Energy Hub. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on virtual power plants, or VPPs, my guest is James Johnston, CEO and co-founder of flexibility marketplace provider Piclo. James is going to explain how a flexibility market can use flexible customer-owned aggregated DER and VPPs to help meet rising electricity demand and protect affordability. James is by training an engineer specializing in renewable energy systems. In 2009, he founded and became managing director of small solar system design and planning company Solar Sketch. And in 2013, he co-founded and became CEO of Piclo, which is to help power providers source distribution system located demand side flexibility. We're going to talk a lot about that. So, James, let's start right there. What is a flexibility market? What is it intended to do? And I know that you've been in the New England markets with National Grid for a while. How has it performed?
Hi, Herman. Great to be on the show. What is a flexibility marketplace? So flexibility is, I guess, just another word for virtual power plant or ability to react to a signal and provide that shift in demand or generation to someone that values it. Typically, it could be a utility that's offsetting peaks. It could be offsetting or targeting congestion on the local distribution grid. It could be helping balancing the regional ISO. And so within that space, we've built out a marketplace. Now, a marketplace really does three things. It drives standardization, it provides visibility, and it creates liquidity. So instead of every single utility having to do their own program or multiple programs, and all the DER aggregators and VPP platforms having to navigate all of that diverse, non-standardized solutions, you go to the marketplace, you put an offer in, you participate in a program, everything is standardized, you get full visibility of everything, and importantly, we are building liquidity. And what I mean by liquidity is if you are either buying or selling flexibility, you find what you're looking for. And so that's what we've done, and you're really excited to be scaling the solution. Initially in New York and New England, but now scaling across the US.
Interesting. You and I have talked about the Piclo concept in the past, but I love the way you break it out. I mean, it makes it clear that what you're doing is taking something that in this country for years that I've covered, people have said, we have this distributed energy resources and aggregated distributed energy resources as virtual power plants can do so much, but the systems don't include ways to monetize these things. So this marketplace, it's such a simple, straightforward idea. You create a marketplace that sets up rules and makes it easy to monetize. Am I saying that right?
And I mean that's the vision. If only it were that easy. Now, I mean, in our sector, you can't get too far away from regulation, rules, institutions, policy, systems, um, frankly, it's quite hard to come up with a truly innovative new approach. And we've been very successful in building this out in the UK and Europe, on the back of some white space in new regulatory models emerging and our marketplace coming at the right time. And now here in the US, after our initial traction in the Northeast, we're really excited by the all the things going on in the sector right now and the opportunity for real change and therefore new models that could be introduced. So I think there's a really timely moment for the marketplace.
Yeah, and to meet this timely moment, you've come forward with this idea of what you call accelerated community energy, ACE, I call it ACE. I hope that's not a problem for you.
That's
And,
it.
and,
That's it.
and I'd like to know more about this concept. How can ACE make large loads like data centers a solution instead of a problem? They're demanding speed to power. These flexibility marketplaces that you're thinking of designing, it seemed to be able to make that the solution for speed to power faster and more reliable and incorporating these large loads. Tell me about what the relationship to uh, ACE is to this growing data center. What do we call it? Not a problem, a challenge. How about that?
Hmm. A challenge which can very quickly become an opportunity. And I think this is the way we should be thinking about it, is um, a massive opportunity for the sector and frankly for all ratepayers in the US. Um, right now we're having an affordability crisis. We have fixed infrastructure. If we can get more of that infrastructure being used, more kilowatt hours through that, it lowers the cost for everyone in theory. The problem is the peak times. If all this new large load comes on board and doesn't contribute to reducing its impact at peak, that's when you have the issues. And so how do we solve this? Now, I think clearly there's this is a sort of all of the above type problem because it's so huge. And of course, there's a massive role for on-site flexibility and generation in this. But I think what is becoming quickly apparent is it there's another way, or there's an additional way that could be really exciting here. And and this is complementing on-site flexibility with off-site. In other words, procuring flexibility from the DER in the community. Now, why this is super exciting. First of all, as becoming quite self-evident now, DER is often the lowest cost, fastest to implement type of energy technology around. And if you level the playing field and allow it to participate, it will solve problems faster than building out, gigawatt scale traditional generation. So it is a valid solution. The second point is I think the social license to operate in communities is a really important factor that data center operators are really having to tackle right now. And providing new revenue streams, potentially new jobs in the local communities, in the neighborhoods and in the state, this is a big win as well. There's so much change, and what's become clear is this core new actor has entered the paradigm, new large load or data centers and hyperscalers in particular. And really the promise is that these new actors can really deliver a lot of value back into the sector and into the to everyone, and not just consider this as a power requirement for themselves. Um, and in particular, the theory is quite clear. Like if you spread more kilowatt hours over fixed infrastructure, you reduce the cost for everyone. Like the promise is very clear. The reality is adding this new base load exacerbates existing peaks. And so it does drive a need for new network and generation investment. So the smart thing to do is to have targeted flexibility at those peaks. And then you get the win-win situation. But how do you make this a win-win-win? Is what ACE is all about. This is not just about flexible data centers, and of course that's a key part of the solution. This is also about giving back to the communities which are hosting these new large loads.
Here's a quick note from the sponsor of our series of podcasts about virtual power plants, Energy Hub. What if everyday devices had the potential to strengthen the grid when it's needed most? Energy Hub helps utilities turn that potential into dependable capacity by coordinating thermostats, EVs, batteries, and other devices so they work together as virtual power plants or VPPs that respond to grid needs in near real time. Energy Hub's latest white paper lays out a maturity model for VPPs that can be planned and dispatched with the same confidence as conventional plants while being 40 to 60% less expensive to build. That's why more than 160 utilities across North America partner with Energy Hub to manage over 2.5 million devices that provide 3.4 gigawatts of flexible capacity. Read the white paper and discover what BPPs can do for your grid at energyhub.com.
And the idea here, which ACE is essentially um, e- energy flexibility outside of the perimeter of the data center. Essentially, they're procuring or bringing their own capacity as part of their interconnection process. And what's really great about this is it's not just about new load, more kilowatt hours, reducing the pressure from the peaks. It's also about new jobs in the state. Data centers don't employ that many people. Installing solar and batteries in houses does,
Yeah,
so this is about giving back and creating new revenue streams for local participants. It really changes the engagement strategy and tactics of these organizations. And 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 what then if you add it on top of all of this, this is not just about a token giveaway to the community. DER, as you know, is the fastest, lowest cost way to deploy new capital capacity in in any energy system. So this is actually a really smart solution as well. This is fast, it's quick, and it gives back. So ACE, it has so much promise, and our position here is you need a marketplace to deliver the ACE model. Um,
right.
we're really enthused to see, adjacent models emerge like what we've seen in Minnesota, um, even this week. Um, uh, but I think where this concept of giving back to the community and unlocking capacity really works is the marketplace. Because the beauty of a marketplace is if you don't need to prescribe what solution you're looking for. You prescribe what you're prescribing your needs. If you say I need this many megawatts and I need them to turn up in 100 hours a year and they need to be in these locations, and then you see what comes back. And what we have a strong hypothesis that there's a lot of hidden megawatts, latent flexibility just in the system today that's just not being activated for one reason or another, whether it's they haven't found the right price point or the right counterparty or the existing program design is too constraining. This is the promise of a marketplace is you unearth that,
Right.
the low-hanging fruit, and that then gets mixed in with everything else.
Let's unpack a little what you've said. Now, first of all, data centers, to some extent, they're doing things to be a little more flexible, like they're putting small gas generators on their property and so when the system needs them to reduce usage a little bit, they use gas generators, or they're using diesel generators, or sometimes maybe there's a battery. But basically, so for starters, if you can find a way to avoid those kinds of things with clean energy resources, solar on the roofs, batteries, EVs, EV charging, then number one, you've cleaned that up, right? That's one of the things that you're talking about. Is that right?
Yeah, I think again, the beauty of a marketplace point is that, perhaps at a utility or a regional level, they set out the framework for how this can work. But an individual large load could go, well, for us, it's really, important that we're only buying clean energy. Others might have it not as a priority. They can then stipulate that as a requirement for entry, for example. So again, this is the beauty of sort of letting the market decide
Right.
in a sense.
But even if a data center doesn't necessarily want, this is something else. I'm trying to unpack what you said, and I'm thinking even if a data center or another regulatory body higher up doesn't have an emphasis on clean energy, the resources to involve community energy are already deployed. They're going to be a lot less expensive than building a new gas generator, right? So it's a sort of a financial opportunity for data centers to draw on community energy. Isn't that something else that you were getting at when we were answering the first question?
Absolutely. So, I mean,
And
fundamentally, marketplace they drive competition. They open up and pool together liquidity. And in this, and we're not talking about liquidity in the sense of like a wholesale market or like a stock exchange. We're talking about liquidity in the sense more like a Craigslist or an Amazon
yeah, yeah.
sense. Like, if is there enough of what you're looking for in the right quantity, and can you match with that? That's what we mean by liquidity. Um,
Mm.
and and what we have found time and time again is there are assets that can be activated. They can be flexible. They are not being activated for one reason or another, typically because there's not enough dollars on the table. And guess what? Guess what? There is no shortage of supply of is dollars when we're talking about AI and data. So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
there's a really exciting sort of triangulation here. So yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot of stranded assets that you could activate, deliver value to the system tomorrow if you had the right, contractual structure and that we'd unlock.
Well, it's a tomorrow that I was just wanted to point out as well, is because even if you have some craving to build a diesel generator, a gas generator, those things are hard to get. Whereas the community resources are already there. All you have to do is have some software to interconnect them. So the other advantage besides low cost and clean is right away. That's another point that you were bringing out,
Yep.
I think. Am I saying
Yep.
that correctly? Yeah, okay, good. So
That's it.
look, I want to get to a couple of other questions about what you're doing here with ACE. Um, you, I read your white paper, and we're going to put a link on our page so that folks can go and read it. But and we're going to talk about solutions. But first, I want you to talk about what your concern is. You wrote that if legislative and regulatory policymakers don't clear the way for the power system to meet the increasingly urgent need for both power and flexibility quickly, the result could be what you described as fragmented outcomes that are more expensive and less efficient. So I think what you're getting at is that data center owners are looking for an easy answer like baseload power. And if policymakers don't make a better choice available, is that what you were talking about? We'll get to the solutions in a minute, but is that what you were getting at when you're saying fragmented outcomes that are more expensive and less efficient?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the first thing to say is like, why are we talking about legislation regulation here? I think what we've learned is that you kind of, for a market to work in energy, a new market, you need two things. You need the marketplace infrastructure, which we're bringing. Um, Tick. Now, the thing that you need aligned with that is aligned as regulatory regulatory frameworks, market frameworks at the state level, at the regional level, at the utility level that fundamentally level the playing field for DER. So that's always the boils down to this singular issue. The DER often operates in a has an unfair advantage compared to traditional solutions, and there are lots of reasons for that. It's a newer technology. It operates differently. Demand response is not the same as a power station. It's more, it's etc. So like, but there are ways to deal with this, and you level the playing field. You have a marketplace, then you unlock all the value. And the problem is if you do this in a patchwork way, um,
Mhm.
you
That's what you
end
mean
up
by fragmented. That's what you mean by fragmented
yeah.
outcome. Yeah.
So like if there isn't y- I think ACE-like models are inevitable. It's going to happen. We're starting to see it happen. We see something similar in Minnesota this week, but we're hearing a lot of interest and seeing things popping up everywhere. The question is, how successful is it going to be, and how fast is this stuff going to develop? Because to the point of urgency, if this takes 2 or 3 years to scale up to any meaningful degree, that's a lifetime in the AI race,
Yeah.
you know. And
2 or 3 years
secondly,
is all they have to replace all the chips every 2 or 3 years.
yeah, and that's 2 or 3 years before they can even start connecting. So like, um, and the second thing is we have right now the flexibility sector in the US is heavily fragmented uh, and frankly, there is a coherent set of revenue streams from wholesale markets, which is emerging. But when you look at utility revenue streams, demand response programs, there is no coherent opportunity. No single aggregator, even the largest aggregators in the country, struggle to provide the services to every utility because it's slightly different variations in the theme everywhere. And
Yeah,
and if we get the same approach now built out for this urgent and potentially really valuable problem and opportunity for data centers, it not only will take too much time, it won't materialize because it'll be too
right.
fragmented. So we
So if
have this opportunity right now to do things differently, to do it in a consistent, unified way, think about standardization, think around having a singular liquidity pool that and fundamentally getting that leveling of the playing field into the sort of rules at everywhere, that would be so powerful.
yeah, what you're saying is there's all this community energy out there, but a lot of places, utilities, power providers, they look around. It's here, it's there. Whereas if you have a Piclo marketplace, then the utility can know exactly where to go get it, and it's as simple as I'm going to go buy a gas plant or I'm going to go buy a battery. I can also go buy flexibility from the marketplace. And that brings me to the last question because you wrote about needing structured ways for both behind the meter flexibility and community scale DER to solve the peak problem. You mentioned the peak problem earlier, which is if the peak gets beyond what the utility is prepared to deal with, it has to either think about building new power plants or it has to think about buying power from an energy market. Both of those things are very expensive, drives up costs, and that drives up the amount of money they have to put into rates and charge ratepayers. So, what are the structured solutions that you're thinking of? How does a legislator or a regulatory entity think about creating a Piclo marketplace?
And this is a really great question. So I think a lot of state legislators are now developing out VPP bills because they can see DER makes a lot of sense and they want to encourage this and develop flexibility. Um, but they have to the danger of trying to just essentially scale up the existing models of the bilateral programs uh, run by utilities. The risk is you basically just scale up something which is a broken model or not the most effective or the best in class model. And and there are a couple of tweaks that you can make to how you think about this, new legislation, um, that that can unlock a lot of value. And a couple of them to mention is,
Yeah,
and probably the single most powerful one, and I mentioned it earlier, is um, force utilities to describe what they want, what outcomes that they want and that's it. Like that, that needs to be the communication that utilities are sending into market is describe it in a way of like, this is the outcomes that we want. We need these many megawatts in this area. We need this level of reliability, et cetera, et cetera. And stay away from any prescription or prescribed solutions or technologies or whatever. Or even, and this is where you take it even further, or even ownership models. And so like there's now a debate around, well, should the utility own the DER or should it be independence? And again, with a well-designed marketplace, you don't even need to make that decision because run by an independent platform like ourselves, and we've seen this time and time again in Europe, um, that as long as there's a need statement coming in and solutions get qualified, whether the company or the solutions meet that minimum threshold, and then it's an economic decision. Who bids in at the right level? The low, who gets to get the contract? If a utility owned asset is the lowest cost solution, they will win the mandate. If they're
Mm,
not, they won't. And
mm.
again, it's not just binary. You might need 100 megawatts or a gigawatt of flex, and it could be 100 organizations that take part. And this is the beauty of the marketplace approach where you don't prescribe the solution ahead of time, you prescribe your needs, is it opens up all these apparently thorny issues that we're kind of tackling as an industry kind of get resolved in that one slight change. And it doesn't require an overhaul in VPP legislation. It's a very simple change. We've seen this in a few places, a very simple change in terms of mindset. Um, and that unlocks a lot.
I think you're basically saying that once the utility is given its marching orders, so to speak, from the legislators and the regulators, then something needs to require that the utility issue a request for proposals, an RFP, not for gas plants or renewable energy, but for flexibility. Is that the
Mhm.
idea?
For
And
megawatts, yeah, for megawatts for
megawatts
capacity,
of
not channeling down a certain solution. Now, for example, certain if they have a certain flavor of technical requirements, it might favor certain solutions versus others, and that's fine. But I think the point is, it's not saying that we're going to. You should set up a thermostat program. You should set up a battery subsidy
right,
program. You need
right.
industrial demand response program. Front of the meter, like you go. I need megawatts. Who can respond? And okay, we'll have different derating factors apply to different technologies like the wholesale markets do. Perfect. And I think it sounds so simple, but like it does actually require a fairly big mindset shift. And so like organizations like National Grid have made that leap. This is what we're doing with them in Massachusetts, and they're being a being an English company as well, that we work with them very closely in England, and there's this we're doing this really at scale in England. Um, it's a model which is proven that works, and I think it just needs that. I think it does require the legislative body to get behind it as a concept.
Okay. I think we've covered that. It's an interesting thing. The United States is a balkanized regulatory system. Every state has to decide what it wants, and based on its politics and its potential resources and that sort of thing. And what's interesting about bringing your ideas for a flexibility marketplace and for ACE to people's attention right now is that so many utilities, driven by this huge growing demand for power for data centers and large loads, are thinking about what opportunities there are. And they're more open to this kind of proposal that you're making than they ever have been in the 20 years that I've been covering the sector. So it's going to be exciting to see what they do. But James, that's all we have time for. I got to thank you. My guest has been Piclo CEO and co-founder James Johnston. He's described the concept of a flexibility marketplace, and he's described large loads use of accelerated community energy, or the ACE in the deck, can meet the fast rising electricity demand and protect affordability. We got to thank our sponsor, Energy Hub, for giving us the chance to have this conversation. And of course, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.